Okay, I don't have all the answers today. I apologize. But I am very pleased and honored to be here. I think we've had some great talks so far. And as Julie said, I'm hoping to provide at least an update and some information on where we are with HMD Diagnostics. Sorry I didn't get my slides changed in time for that. But and a little bit in the insight of the process that we go through. And so with that, I'm going to talk about who's involved, who has to come together, and what we do, and what our process is, a really brief, wide breadth overview of the scope of the projects we have going on right now, and then probably what you all are expecting is just a status update on all of our projects. So I don't think there was a memo. If there was, I didn't see it, but I think certainly we are all on the same page, and that's why we're sitting here today, because partnership is key for us to establish, maintain, and improve our preparedness. I think we all agree and have heard that from each of our speakers today. We have made significant progress in doing this together, identifying our gaps and trying to solve them with new tools, but we've got more to do. So first I promised I would describe who are our partners. So just from the diagnostic perspective, and certainly there's many of you out there, but remember this is focused from the diagnostic perspective. First we have our National Veterinary Service laboratories in Ames, Iowa, and at the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab in Plum Island, New York. They're primarily responsible for all of the FMD work that goes on within APHIS. And then NAHLN, the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. Our network was formed in 2002, over 10 years ago. We're a partnership between USDA-APHIS and USDA National Institutes of Food and Agriculture, the American Association of Veterinary Laboratory Diagnosticians, and of course our state, university, and federal laboratories across the country. We now have 62 labs within the network. Our focuses and our responsibilities, our mission is early detection through targeted surveillance, rapid response, and providing surge capacity during an outbreak, as well as recovery, so that long-term testing to show freedom. We also work closely with the Agricultural Research Services, and this is our chief scientific research agency within USDA. They have a lot of involvement in diagnostic and vaccine development. Our partnerships with Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology have been increasing a lot over the last few years, and I think that's really helped us to make a lot of progress. We work pretty closely with the Chemical and Biological Defense Division, as well as the National Centers of Excellence for Zoonotic and Animal Disease Defense. That includes FASD, TVMBL, and CZAD at Kansas State. We also, out at FADL, they have a really close collaboration with the Bioforensic Analytics Center. This is actually a slide that I borrowed from our DHS colleagues because this is what they show, and I think it's a really good illustration of how we work together, especially for a lot of the projects that go on at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, in which a lot of the FMD projects occur there. So DHS really has become a really great partner in providing the support, and of course USDA gathers and provides the expertise. So now a little bit on the process. So we don't just do this at will. There is a definitely defined process that we continue to improve as we move along, but I wanted to describe it for you all today. This is actually another slide that I borrowed from DHS, but it really shows the process we use can be on a wide scale level or on a small level. But first it starts with the gap identification. So what are our gaps? Then we pull experts together and figure out what are the requirements to fill that gaps and what we need. Then we have to look on how whatever we come up with, whatever the tool is, the solution, would be used, and get the end user input. And then work on the implementation piece. And throughout all of this, we have to consider the operations, the policy, and the response, which many of you have hands in this room. So for the gap identification piece, one way that we've been able to do that from the diagnostic side is through these DHS-sponsored and FASD-sponsored ag screening tool workshops. I think many of you have participated. It's been a series of 4 so far. I know they have a few more coming down the pike. And basically what they do is they gather stakeholders, just as yourselves together, very similar to this, and have very focused conversations. They've defined what our tools are, looked at what we have out there, and what are our gaps. We've had a specific meeting with industry to get the input on what industry needs, so sort of that end-user piece on the concept of operations. We've also had a lab-focused concept of operations meeting. And then most recently, the last one, we had one pretty specific for the NAHLN laboratories about what our policies are in using these diagnostics and the procedures during an outbreak. So what gaps? So what gaps have been identified through these AST workshops? There are many, I have to say, which all of us know. On the diagnostic front, a gap for need of pen-side tests, for multiplex assays, DIVA assays, high throughput testing, and PCR in milk are just among some of the gaps. In terms of assay validation, and specifically for the NAHLN, we need high throughput diagnostic platforms, improved sample pooling methods, including milk, being able to use our assay in different types of samples than we might already have. Dr. Hollinger mentioned wildlife samples and really the policy around what we do with that, and validating assays during the course of an outbreak. At the laboratories themselves, there's been gaps identified, a need to be able to have a pretty good estimate of our lab capacity, and policies on the concept of operations. I mentioned the Ag Screening Tools 3 and 4 really focused on that, as well as data management, right? IT usually comes up in a gap, most every conversation. So at the field level, we have gaps there too and needs there too. It's been reiterated, and actually it was brought up yesterday in the Emerging Disease Committee about the need for our foreign animal disease diagnosticians to continually be trained on procedures, on FAD identification, as well as policies. And also to be able to communicate and train our folks on the guidance that VS provides. So what do? We have all these gaps. Well, at least for those assays that are intended to go into our NAHLN laboratories, we've looked at all of these gaps, try to assess them and prioritize them and see what we can solve. And that's what we're going to get to today, where we are on stepping along for this solution. Within the NAHLN, we have a methods and technical working group, and this is a group of experts across the NAHLN laboratories. They're from all over the country that actually volunteered to be on this group. And we have processes that we've established there to be able to receive and review and put forward proposals about how we're going to fill these specific gaps for a validation, assay development, assay validation, methods comparison. They make sure whatever the proposer has put forward is consistent with OIE guidelines and what AABLD has developed. Most of our members are also on other AABLD committees. Once the proposal is sort of given the green light by this group, the researcher goes back, does their work, and brings back a dossier, which is basically a packet that has a whole bunch of information on how that assay performs, everything that we can gather based on analytical evaluation, as well as field evaluation, repeatability, fitness for purpose, fitness for use, all those things that we need to know about how to use an assay. The Methods Technical Working Group reviews that and puts forward recommendations to VS on if and how we should use that assay. So that process, we've used it a couple times. It's, again, evolving, but it seems to be working really well. Then we get to the implementation in the NAHLN piece, and there's a bunch of logistics and work that goes into that. It's not as easy as saying, okay, we're done. It can just be released. We have to have people trained. We have to have people understand how to use it, because remember, with the NAHLN, it's a standardization across all the laboratories is really important. And so everybody uses the same SOP. Everyone receives the same training. They're all proficiency tested. We also have to make sure everyone knows how they're going to use this assay, what part of the algorithm is it in for routine use or for outbreak use. They have to have guidance documents. And then once we've gone through all that, we also have to continually monitor how it's performing if we can. So that's the process that has evolved and what we've followed for all these gaps. Not all of them, but some of the gaps that we've identified. So just briefly, we have a number of projects, as you know, between FADL and ARS and FASD, and this is just a snapshot of those that we have in assay development and assay validation, and then some others that fall into that enhancing our capability and capacity. Some of these up here are not for FMD, but I just wanted to give you a quick glimpse of all the different projects that are going on, filling FMD gaps as well as in other technologies. So probably what you all really want to hear is just an update on some of these key projects that we are engaged in and have identified to fill those gaps. So on the assay development and validation front, one of the gaps has been our serologic capability for FMD. So right now we're actually just about to launch interlaboratory comparison and a negative cohort on a 3ABC ELISA. This is a DIVA ELISA, commercially available kit, not in this country, PrioCheck. We need to know how this assay is going to perform on our animals in our country. We need to know what it will cross-react with, and we can know how it's expect how many false positives we will have. So that's why we do the negative cohort. We also are working with FASD on a development of a new 3ABC ELISA. This kit is expected to have equal or improved performance to the PrioCheck. The reason we need another ELISA in our toolbox is because PrioCheck is currently not licensed in the U.S., and so there are a number of logistical issues of being able to use it here. We can do it if we have an outbreak, but we would support something that would be a little bit easier and to be licensed in the U.S. Longer term, diagnosticians are always looking for something new and better. How can we improve it? So they are at FADL working on developing new ELISAs, 3ABC and 3D ELISAs, really focusing on what's amenable to high throughput. Pen sites. I mentioned pen sites as another one of our diagnostic gaps. There is a current project underway for the evaluation, a negative cohort for one of our pen site assays. It's a sphenovidip. It's an antigen lateral flow device for FMD. We did a small pilot with 2 labs last year just to get a feel initially for how it performed. This is preliminary data. It looks like it's pretty good with some caveats. It seems to be most suitable for sampling of lesions, which really influences how we might use it. And we've got, fairly wide windows of detection, but it also varies on which serotype of FMD we're looking at. So that's just preliminary data. We're doing the larger study. Like I say, now it's underway, and we'll have more information that will be able to allow the Methods Technical Working Group to make some recommendations on how this assay should be used and how it should not be used, and so we can form some guidance. Currently, we don't have any guidance with NBS regarding FMD pen site assays, so a gap that we're working towards filling. Of particular interest to those states that have a great dairy industry, something we have not had is an ability for rapid detection in bulk tank milk for FMD. We have been working through a collaboration between FADL, FASD, DHS, and several NAHLN laboratories that have been key in developing this assay. It's now almost through the validation process. We've done an interlaboratory comparison and a negative cohort in 5 different NAHLN laboratories. And basically, our focus is to come up with an assay that we can deploy to the NAHLN labs and use in our business continuity planning, and we should have that dossier completed and evaluated by August. Some other samples some other projects that FADL is looking at is evaluation of oral fluids. We know our swine industry is really moving towards this as a sample, so they want to see how we can use it for FAD diagnostics. This includes FMD, CSF, and ASF. They're developing multiplex PCR for the rapid surveillance for these diseases, as well as some endemic components. And this is supposed to be completed next year. This is just a really brief slide. Some of these things aren't FMD, but really to just show that we have all of these projects ongoing. yes, they're addressing specific gaps for FMD, but also the work that we do with these other diseases helps us with our work with FMD. Enhancing capability and capacity. We have a number of projects underway here. And first are our reagents and vaccine support. So out at FADL, they maintain an FMD antisera bank. It's kept up to date, and this is to help us fulfill our needs for our FMD diagnostics that we use on a regular basis out at FADL for FAD investigations, assay validation, our proficiency tested that we do annually across the known laboratories, as well as some research. They have a number of transboundary vaccine projects in which they're testing master seed and commercially available vaccines to determine their cross-protection. They've just recently completed, and the analysis is underway on a pilot study of in vivo cross-protection for FMD vaccines with 3 different A vaccines. On the laboratory and field side, building our capacity and capability, one of the gaps identified not so much through the egg screening tools, but through an Fmd Exercise Series we did in 2011 through the NAHLN, was the fact that the labs didn't necessarily have FMD controls on hand to be able to prepare, and there was concern about the time gap it might take to get those in their hands. So this year was the first year that FADL has prepared them, and we have distributed to all FMD-approved known laboratories. There's 43. They all received FMD controls to have on hand either for FAD investigation, as Dr. Zach mentioned, that preliminary PCR can be done in the known laboratories, as well as preparedness for an outbreak. We continue to support our quality management system trainings. This is really important to keep the integrity and our confidence up in our known laboratories. We've developed a portal, which is a secure way for us to more quickly exchange information, not data, but information with the laboratories, such as providing secure SOPs and proficiency testing information. I mentioned our 2011 Fmd Exercise Series. It was great. I think we went to 16 different sites and had 30 different laboratories and states participate, but we need to find perhaps a more efficient way to be able to still continue exercise. So we've developed and piloted a web-based exercise program that really brings together a few tools that the labs can use on their own to regularly test their concept of operations and the policies within their laboratories. Sort of on the field side, Dr. Zach's group has really worked hard to revise VS Memo 580.4, which is now VS Guidance 12,001.1. Doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well, but we're getting used to it. And get that distributed out to all the states, out to all the labs, and all the FIDs, I believe, for FADDs received those. So really pushing that education piece, that gap there, as well as providing FADD refresher courses, which is sort of a new thing, but a number of courses around the country to allow practitioners to attend. On the lab capacity gap, it was duly noted that we didn't have a really great way to estimate our lab capacity across as a network. And so we did a collaboration project with FASD. It's actually still ongoing and in phase 2 of that project, to develop a software tool for evaluating and monitoring the capacity of our labs. All the labs now have this, and most of them have entered information for specific scenarios and processes such as FMD PCR, AI PCR, that allows us for them to look at their rate limiting steps on a local lab level, and it rolls up to the network, and so we can look across all the labs. We're really excited for this to be fully implemented, as well as the enhancements that they're making in version 2, which hopefully will really help labs do the business they need to that's outside the known and encourage their use. So finally, opportunities and challenges. Of course, with any progress, opportunities and challenges come. We have these new tools. We've addressed our serological gap. We're working on assessing what we have available outside the United States and developing something new. We're working on multiplex assays, new sample types, including milk and oral fluids, and providing information about using a pin-side assay. But with that becomes challenges. So once we have these assays, how are we going to use them, and when is the right way to use them, and we need to provide guidance on that. And that's an opportunity for communication, but also a challenge that has people concerned, frankly, with moving FAD assays outside of FADL. We rely heavily on our international collaborations for developing and validating these assays. You've seen all the FMD positive countries. It's really important that we get positive samples as part of that assay validation packet for the dossier. And again, we like commercial assays. They're great because we're able to then, it's really easy for us to standardize across the NAHLN laboratories, but there's always issues with availability and training and that sort of thing. So I go back to our partnership. We've made progress. We have filled many gaps. We still have a long way to go, but it's really important. I think that we're here today is part of the process of moving forward, for getting input and getting us all on the same page.